Hi there! Today we're going to be reviewing theme and central message. You've been reviewing these ideas in class with lots of different texts and poems. Today though, we are going to revisit a poem that you looked at this week in class, and we're going to use that text to help us determine the theme and central message. All right, so I just wanted to give you some context for what this part of my lesson will look like. So this is going to be my I do part of the lesson, where I am telling students our learning goal for the session and reviewing what theme is and how to identify theme before we move into our we do part of the lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that before we move into the next part. All right, scholars, well, today's learning goal for our session is that we can determine the theme or central message of a story or poem using evidence and details. So with that learning goal today, I want us to really focus on two pieces. One being that we can identify the theme or central message, but the second piece is that we're going to be using evidence and details to help us do so. It's always so important as readers that we use evidence to support our claims, whether that claim is about a character's feeling, about the theme, or the plot. And so we're really going to practice using those evidence and details to support our ideas for what the author's theme or central message is. So before we jump into our story, I want to take some time to review what theme is so we can remind ourselves what exactly we're looking for. So theme is the heart of a story, and the theme is often inferred. So does everyone remember what an inference is? Okay, I see some head nods. I'm sure we remember hearing this term, but let's make sure that we review what an inference is, because readers always have to use inferences, whether we're inferring the theme. We'll use inferences if we're inferring something about the plot, a character's development, or inferring the meaning of an unknown word. And so with these inferences, I like to think of them as an educated guess. It means that we're looking at the story and what's being presented here, and we're trying to think of what the author or text is trying to convey. And again, we can use this idea of an inference in lots of different areas of reading. And today we're going to use our inferences about what the text is telling us and what the text is conveying to us to help us infer what the theme of our poem, Where the Sidewalk Ends, is. So readers, we can also determine the theme or central message of the story by really paying careful attention to the lessons that the character learned. So there's three questions we want to think about when we are paying attention to the theme and trying to determine what that theme or central message is. The first question we want to think about is, what lessons did the character learn in the story? So thinking about when you're looking at the text, really taking a step back or trying to put yourself in the character's shoes and saying, okay, based on what happened, what lessons did that character learn from the beginning of the story to the middle to the end? Not only that though, the second question we want to think about is, how did the characters change? So oftentimes in stories, no matter what kind of lesson a character learned, you're going to notice that the characters make a change. You might see an emotional change. They may have a physical change or a change in perspective. But it's important to think not only what lessons did they learn, but how did that character have to evolve and what did they have to go through or change in order to learn that lesson. The last question, question 3, is thinking about what message could the author be saying about life. So with this bigger message, this is the question we're really going to be focusing on today when we revisit our poem. So when we look at the poem, we really want to focus on what is Shel Silverstein trying to convey about life through that poem, Where the Sidewalk Ends. So again, while we do this, we really want to focus on using evidence to support our ideas, use those inferences to help us make our claims about what we think the theme or central message is, and then focus on that bigger message that Shel Silverstein is saying about life. And all those things combined are going to help us to determine the theme or central message of our poem. All right, so that would end the I do part of my lesson. Depending on how students were responding, I may have offered some more explanation for how to determine the theme. But for now, though, I'm going to go ahead and go into the we do part of the lesson and show you what our discussion of this text would look like. All right, scholars, well, now it's time for us to look at that text and revisit the poem. Before we look at the words in the text, I want you just to pause for a moment and look at the illustration on the board. And while you're looking at this, I want you to think of what is this illustration conveying? But also, why do you think Shel Silverstein included this illustration? All right, so let's take a look. What are we thinking here? So again, I would listen to students' responses, really discuss with them how authors are purposeful with including their illustrations, and having students really make a lot of inferences about what's inside this picture and use the inferences that they're making, record some notes and record those on the whiteboard, and then use those to really drive our instruction with the text and make those connections between the inferences we made with the image and then the inferences that we're seeing in the text to help us determine that theme or central message. Okay, well now it's time for us to look at the words in the text, because we know that not only can we make inferences using those illustrations, but we can look at the text and we're going to make inferences based on some words and phrases we see here and really try to think about what message or bigger message about life is Shel Silverstein trying to convey throughout this poem. So what we're going to do is we're going to read each stanza and we'll pause after each stanza, and we'll do that so we can break down the meaning of some of those words and phrases and chunk that as we go along. So just to remind you, we know that a stanza, it's kind of like a short paragraph, and this is a tool that authors use in poetry to chunk their work or their writing. So one thing to note as well is sometimes authors will include important information in each stanza where the message can stand alone in each stanza, but then each of those different messages throughout the poem in those separate stanzas all tie back to that main central theme. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at stanza number 1 and see if we can take a look at these words and phrases and infer some deeper meanings in the text. So it says, there is a place where the sidewalk ends and before the street begins. And there the grass grows soft and white, and the sun burns crimson bright. All right, so there's the end of our first stanza, and there's 2 things I want us to think about in that very first stanza. The first thing is the very first phrase that we heard. There is a place where the sidewalk ends and before the street begins. So on your page, I want you to write down what you think this place is. Shel Silverstein saying the place where the sidewalk ends and before the street begins. So write down some ideas. You can have more than one. What do you think this place could be? You can record that in the margins of your text. All right, so I give students a few moments to record that, talk about what they're recording for that, really guide them to think about what we're inferring from the text and tie that back to the illustration. And then we jump into another piece from stanza 1 before continuing to read. All right, scholars, one other piece I want us to look at from stanza 1 is about the sun burning crimson bright. Do we know what the word crimson means? So if you're stuck, sometimes with inferences, especially when I'm inferring the meaning of unknown words, I like to replace that unknown word and try to use a synonym and see if it makes sense. So see if you're able to do that and infer the meaning here. A place where the sun burns something bright. All right, so think about it. Maybe it's trying to talk about the way the sun looks, how bright it is. Or maybe I saw someone record something about how the sunset looks or the sunrise looks and the different colors we're seeing here. So maybe Shel Silverstein's trying to convey something like that with that word crimson bright. Great job so far. Let's go ahead and look at the next stanza, stanza number 2, and we'll pause at the end of that stanza to discuss some important pieces here. And there the moonbird rests from his flight to cool in the peppermint wind. Let us leave this place where the smoke blows black and the dark street winds, winds and bends, past the pits where the asphalt flowers grow. All right, one piece I want us to look at here is that peppermint wind. What exactly is Shel Silverstein trying to talk about with that peppermint wind? Yeah, he could just be talking about the wind, but we know that authors, especially in poetry, use lots of figurative language. So what exactly do you think peppermint wind means here? What is Shel Silverstein trying to convey with that peppermint wind? Maybe it's the feeling of the wind. Good. What else? Good, it maybe could be the smell, depending on the season or where they're at. Also think about if I would give you a peppermint, you would pop that in your mouth. What would that be like? What would you be experiencing? It's minty. Ooh, it's refreshing. Write that down, refreshing. I know if I pop a pepper in my mouth and my nose especially will get so cold. So I'm thinking about, I know if I step outside, either in the brisk of morning or if it's really snowy outside and a gust of wind comes, it kind of takes your breath away. You could feel it all throughout your body. Maybe there's some symbolism with that that's happening here, and that's why Shel Silverstein's using that example of the peppermint wind. Good work, that's awesome. All right, so again, I would take some more student responses, continue looking at those different words and phrases, and then continuing to read. All right, so scholars, now we have the last stanza to look at here. So let's go ahead and read that, and we'll pause at this last one. So it says, "We shall walk with a walk that is measured and slow, and watch where the chalk-white arrows go, to the place where the sidewalk ends. Yes, we'll walk with a walk that is measured and slow, and we'll go where the chalk-white arrows go." All right, so something else readers do is we can make annotations on the text. That means make notes. So I want you to make some notes. There's a lot of things here that I know could have lots of different meanings. Record questions you have, things you're visualizing, things that you are wondering about. Mark up your paper because all of those things you're writing down are inferences that we're going to tie back to make that overall inference of what the theme or central message is. All right, so again, as we start to wrap up looking at the we do part of the lesson, my biggest piece here would really be working with students, helping them infer the meaning, not only of the entire poem, but breaking down the meaning of those stanzas and those words and phrases, and really focusing on what these mean, really connecting our different metacognitive strategies with asking questions, what we think, what we visualize, what we picture, and using all of those pieces and helping them record those on their page, share those in a discussion to then really drive us to that point of what is the theme or central message here. And so I just wanted to take some time to show you some of my questioning I would use. But again, I really spent a lot of time here, work with students on those annotations and really use those to drive our discussion. So then that would conclude the we do part of my lesson. And so then just to show you what the I do part would look like, after we would end the discussion, I would leave students with these 4 questions to think about. So the first 2 talk about the peppermint wind. So first one has a multiple choice, asking them to determine what they think the meaning is. So focusing on the comprehension since we talked about that together, and then driving them back to that idea of the evidence. So those 2 would be a 2-part question, focusing on that idea of the peppermint wind. Then I would also ask them 2 of these questions that are open-ended that then tie back to our learning goal of what is the theme or central message, and that also allow us to share evidence. And so one being, we know it says a place where the sidewalk ends, and this place, asking them to figure out why the author is using those and why they differ, support that with evidence. And then the last thing, talking about how we know in the poem that the children only know where this place ends. And so really using that question to help probe students and guide them to seeing that theme. So I would use all of those questions as a formative assessment and then use those points they're recording to guide our next discussion to then really wrap up, okay, what is this theme, and connect all of those pieces that we were doing together. All right, well, thank you.